Korean mafia boss meets a black woman he has never met, but she calls him honey. At 35, Song Tae-ho had everything most people spent a lifetime chasing: wealth, power, influence, and a name that made people think twice before crossing him. But there was one thing he had never had: a family. Tae-ho convinced himself that marriage was a weakness and children were a distraction. Love was something he could not afford. Then, one afternoon, while meditating in the quiet of his home, something happened that changed everything. He opened his eyes and found himself in another life. Warm sunlight, soft curtains, a bedroom he had never seen, and beside him, a woman. She was beautiful, peaceful, and completely at ease. She kissed him and whispered, "Morning, honey." Then, a small voice exploded from the doorway. A little girl, 3 years old, completely ignoring the nanny chasing after her. "Papa, you promised me pancakes." And strangely enough, he knew them. He knew the house. He knew the family. He knew they were his. For nearly an hour, Song Tae-ho lived as a loving husband and devoted father, in a world where he was never the feared man he was in his own. Then he suddenly woke up. His doctor and bodyguard were standing over him, and he discovered something impossible. He had been gone for 48 hours. But how could the same man live two separate lives, two completely opposite lives, in two different worlds? That is what we're about to find out. Seoul had a way of making a man feel powerful. Song Tae-ho had always appreciated that about it. In a city that never stopped, a man who never stopped fit right in. His mansion sat right in the middle of Seoul. From his windows, the city spread out in every direction, lit up and alive at all hours, full of people rushing toward things that mattered to them. Tae-ho watched it sometimes, not with longing, but with satisfaction, because he had already secured his place in it. He was 35 years old. His name carried weight in rooms he never entered. Deals were made because of him. Decisions were reversed because of him. He had spent the better part of a decade building that kind of influence. His daily life was orderly to a degree. He would wake up early, work long hours, return home, and repeat the cycle. He was consistent and found comfort in his routine. He did not attend social gatherings, never had friends, because he did not see the use of them, and did not speak more than was necessary in any given conversation. There was, however, one thing about Song Tae-ho that surprised anyone who discovered it. Several times a week, a man named Swami Aravind came to his home. Aravind was an Indian monk who had spent decades studying yoga, meditation, and what he liked to call the interior architecture of the human mind. He was calm. He wore simple clothing, spoke carefully, and had a habit of smiling even at moments that made other people want to ask what exactly he knew that they did not. He had been coming to Tae-ho's mansion for 2 years, guiding him through private yoga and meditation sessions that Tae-ho had initially requested for entirely practical reasons. "I want better physical discipline," Tae-ho had told him at their first meeting, "and I want to manage stress more efficiently." Aravind had looked at him for a moment before responding, "Those are reasonable goals. We will begin there." What Tae-ho had not expected was that yoga would give him something his wealth had never quite managed to provide: silence. Not the absence of sound, but internal quiet that made it possible to sit inside his own mind without immediately wanting to leave it. The breathing exercises regulated something in him that he had never been able to regulate through sheer will alone. The meditation sessions gave him space where the constant calculation that occupied his waking hours simply stopped. He never described it in those terms, of course. Whenever Aravind asked him why he continued the sessions, Tae-ho gave the same answer: "It keeps my mind sharp." Aravind would smile. "You mean it keeps your mind from eating you alive?" Tae-ho would look at him. "I preferred my explanation." "Of course you did." It became a ritual between them, that small exchange, and despite himself, Tae-ho had come to look forward to it. The Tuesday afternoon that changed everything began with Tae-ho in his main office when his lieutenant came in with news. News about another syndicate that would have made him want to react immediately, loudly and in ways he would later have to manage the consequences of. Tae-ho sat very still for several seconds after his lieutenant finished speaking. Then he said, "Leave." His lieutenant left. Tae-ho remained at his desk for a moment, aware of the anger eating him up. He learned, through years of practice, that the decisions he made from that particular state of mind were almost always decisions he later wished he had made differently. Yoga had taught him that. Aravind had reinforced it. So instead of calling anyone back into the room, he stood up, walked down the corridor of his mansion, and entered the meditation room. It was a spare, quiet space, a mat on the floor, a low table with a single candle he rarely lit, nothing on the walls. He had designed it that way deliberately. No distractions, no softness, just a room built entirely for the purpose of silence. He sat down on the mat, settled his posture, and closed his eyes. He began breathing the way Aravind had taught him, slow and deliberate, drawing air in through the nose and releasing it steadily. In, out. In, out. He focused on the breath and let everything else move to the edges of his awareness. The anger, the news from his lieutenant, the calculations his mind wanted to run about what came next. Gradually, every other sound grew distant. His shoulders released tension. His breathing found its rhythm. And then, something happened. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flash of light, nothing extraordinary. It was just a quiet and total shift, as though the room he was sitting in had been gently replaced by somewhere else entirely, and his body had not noticed the transition until it was already complete. He opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was light, warm, natural morning light, coming through curtains that moved slightly in a breeze from somewhere. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar. The bed beneath him was not his. The room around him was aesthetically pleasing, with small personal details everywhere that communicated that people actually inhabited the space. Tae-ho sat up slowly, taking in his surroundings with keen attention. He was assessing the unfamiliar environment. Then he felt movement beside him. He turned. A woman was lying next to him. She was Black American, beautiful. Her stillness while asleep made her look like someone entirely at peace with the world she inhabited. As he looked at her, she stirred, and then she opened her eyes. She looked at him and smiled. It wasn't just a polite or cautious smile. She smiled like a woman waking up beside someone she loved, easy and warm, and completely without pretense. "Morning, honey," she whispered. Tae-ho looked at her. He had never seen this woman before in his life, and yet, something about the way she looked at him, something about the light in the room and the warmth of the space made him feel not alarmed, but strangely, inexplicably settled, as though some part of him recognized what his conscious mind could not place. Almost without deciding to, he leaned over and pressed his lips gently to her forehead. She closed her eyes briefly, and her smile deepened. Then the doorway erupted. "Good morning, Papa. Good morning, Mama." A 3-year-old girl came running into the room like she had somewhere to be, and nothing anybody did would slow her down. She had the most determined expression Tae-ho had ever seen on a child that age. Behind her, a nanny appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless. "Nuri, we were supposed to get dressed first." The little girl ignored this completely. She reached the bed, grabbed the frame with both hands, and hauled herself up with great effort and great satisfaction, then immediately turned to Tae-ho and fixed him with a look of absolute seriousness. "Papa, you promised me pancakes." Tae-ho looked at her. This child, this small, bright-eyed, completely confident little person who had just climbed into his lap and was now staring at him as though the entire morning depended on his answer. He could not explain what was happening in his chest. He smiled. Did I? Nuri nodded once, firmly. Yes. The woman beside him, whose name he somehow knew was Cora, laughed. You did. Taiho looked at the little girl for another moment. Then he sighed in a way that was not really a sigh of resignation. Then I suppose I have no choice. Nuri turned to the nanny with a triumphant expression. See, Papa remembered. The nanny laughed. Cora leaned over and kissed Taeho on the cheek, and in that moment, Song Taeho felt something he had spent 35 years making sure he would never need to feel. He felt like he belonged somewhere. The experience continued beyond that first morning. Taeho found himself moving through the hours of this other life with a quality of presence he could not have manufactured in his own. The house was beautiful, set near the water, with wide windows and the sound of the sea in the background at all times. There were no bodyguards standing outside the door, no reports waiting on his desk, no lieutenants with news that required immediate decisions. This version of himself was successful. That was clear. He was still a man of intelligence and discipline and means. But success here had not swallowed everything else. He was a businessman, yes, but he was also a husband and a father, and he was present in both of those things in a way that the Taeho sitting in his Seoul mansion had never hoped to be. He watched himself move through ordinary moments that felt anything but ordinary. He walked along the beach with Nuri, matching his pace to her small, uneven one, stopping when she stopped to examine something in the sand. Later, he stood outside the house at a grill, and Cora sat nearby, watching him with an expression that contained a great deal of amusement. You know, she said, for a man who claims he doesn't like cooking, you spend an awful lot of time near that grill. Taeho kept his eyes on the food. I don't cook. She looked at the grill, then at him. What do you call that? Supervising. Cora laughed, and Nuri looked up from where she was playing to smile without even knowing what was funny. And Taeho stood there in the warmth of the afternoon with the smell of food and the two people he loved the most, and he thought of nothing else except always being there for them. No grand events, no significant occasions. Just breakfast with family, and laughter, and a child's voice, and the pleasure of being somewhere that felt like home. He had never understood, until that moment, how much weight ordinary things could carry. The experience felt like it lasted close to an hour, and then, without warning, without transition, without any ceremony at all, it ended. If you are still watching this story, it means you are enjoying it. And that means the world to us. Please take 2 seconds to hit the like button. It helps more people find stories like this one. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the stories we drop every day. Now, back to Taeho. He opened his eyes in his meditation room. The candle on the low table had never been lit. The walls were bare. The mat beneath him was the same mat it had always been. Everything in the room was exactly as he had left it. His bodyguard was crouched beside him. His private doctor was on his other side, and both men looked frightened but were working very hard not to let it show. Taeho sat up slowly. His body felt completely normal, rested even. He felt as though he had been gone for perhaps an hour, maybe slightly less. What time is it? He asked. His doctor told him. Taeho looked at his phone to confirm it, and then he went still. Today is Thursday? His bodyguard confirmed that too. 48 hours had passed. His doctor explained that his body had remained stable throughout. His breathing, his pulse, his temperature, all normal. But he had been in an unusually deep state of unconsciousness that nothing in the doctor's training had prepared him to categorize. Taeho listened to all of this without responding. He did not tell them about the sunlit bedroom. He did not tell them about the woman who had called him honey with the ease of long love. He did not tell them about Nuri, or the beach, or the grill, or the way a 3-year-old had climbed into his lap and looked at him like he was the most reliable person in her world. There was no one he wanted to tell anyway. He told himself it was a dream, an unusually vivid one, produced by the depth of the meditation and possibly by the stress of the afternoon. He was a practical man. He believed in facts, in evidence, in things that could be verified. He did not believe in alternate universes or mystical experiences or the idea that a man's consciousness could simply wander off into another life while his body sat quietly on a mat. He went back to work the next morning. He handled the problem his lieutenant had brought him, attended his meetings, returned his calls, and maintained his schedule with the same discipline that had always served him. But something had changed, not in the world around him, in him. He stood at his office window at the end of a long day and found himself looking at the city below without the usual sense of ownership. He sat at dinner alone, as he always did, and found that the silence in the room felt different than it ever had before. It didn't seem peaceful. It felt empty. He told himself it would pass, but he lied. Several days after the meditation, Taehyoo was at his desk, reviewing documents when he saw her. Cora was standing near the doorway of his office. She looked exactly as she had in the other place. Calm, warm, looking at him and smiling. He blinked, but she was gone. He sat at his desk for a long moment, looking at the empty doorway. Then he picked up his pen and went back to his documents. 3 days after that, he was in the back of his car, moving through traffic, when he saw Nuri. She was running along a stretch of beach that he could see clearly, despite the fact that there was no beach on that road, no water anywhere nearby, nothing that explained what he was seeing. She was laughing, her arms out at her sides, the way small children run when they are simply happy to be moving. And then she was gone, and there was only the road and the traffic, and his bodyguard glancing at him from the front seat, with an expression that asked nothing. The visions came with increasing frequency after that, always brief, never frightening, a fragment of Cora's laugh, Nuri's face, the sunlit bedroom, the sound of the sea. They arrived without warning, in his office, in his car, in the corridors of his own home, and they left just as suddenly, replaced by the ordinary details of his actual life. He worked longer hours, thinking that exhaustion would quiet whatever was happening. He slept less, which did not help anything. He reduced his meditation sessions, reasoning that whatever had opened during that first deep practice might close again if he simply avoided the conditions that produced it. The visions did not decrease. If anything, they became more frequent and more detailed and increasingly difficult to dismiss as the brain's response to stress or fatigue. The morning of the Cora incident, Taehyoo was preparing to leave for an important meeting. He was in the main entrance of his mansion, his lieutenant going over the schedule for the afternoon, and his bodyguard standing near the door. Then Cora appeared. She was standing a few feet away, looking at him, and she said, in the same warm voice he had heard in that bedroom, "Honey, when are you coming home for dinner?" Taehyoo turned to her and said, loudly and with complete conviction, "I am not your husband." The room went very quiet. His lieutenant stopped talking mid-sentence. His bodyguard did not move, but he looked as surprised as the lieutenant. Taehyoo looked at both of them looking at him, and then he looked back at the space where Cora had been standing. She was gone. He straightened the front of his jacket. "Why are you both looking at me?" Neither of them answered immediately. Taehyoo pointed at the empty space. "Didn't you see the woman?" His lieutenant and his bodyguard looked at each other briefly, then back at him. His lieutenant said, very carefully, "Which woman, sir?" Taehyoo looked at him. Then he looked at the space again. Then he clasped his hands behind his back and said, "Never mind." His bodyguard asked, after a pause that lasted slightly too long, "Are we still going to the meeting?" Taehyoo looked toward the door. Then at the empty space. Then he turned and walked back into the mansion. "No! Why not, sir?" He stopped walking, but did not turn around. I suddenly don't feel like going. He went back inside. His lieutenant and his bodyguard remained exactly where they were, in the entrance, and said absolutely nothing to each other for what felt like a very long time. It was around this time that Taeho decided he needed to speak to Aravind. Aravind arrived the following morning for their scheduled session. He came in, set his bag down near the mat, and took a moment to settle himself before saying anything to anyone. Taeho was already in the room when he arrived, sitting in a chair near the window rather than on the mat, which was the first thing Aravind noticed. He did not comment on it. He sat down across from Taeho and waited. Taeho looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Something happened during my last meditation." Aravind nodded slowly. "Tell me." So Taeho told him. He described the bedroom, the light, the woman who called him honey, the child who demanded pancakes. He described the beach and the house and the hours he had spent moving through a life that was entirely unfamiliar and entirely his at the same time. He described waking up 48 hours later on his meditation mat. He described the visions that had followed, and then he described the incident at the entrance of his mansion, his lieutenant and bodyguard's reaction, and the moment he had told a woman only he could see that he was not her husband. When he finished, he looked at Aravind, waiting patiently for an explanation, or at least a confirmation that he was losing his mind. Aravind was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I believe that you experienced something." Taeho looked at him. "That is not the same as believing me." "No," Aravind agreed. "It is not, because what you experienced, I cannot verify. What I can say is that deep meditation can produce changes in perception that ordinary waking life does not prepare us for. Many traditions have described consciousness as something that is capable of moving beyond its usual boundaries. Whether that is metaphor or literal truth, I cannot tell you with certainty." Taeho was quiet. Aravind continued. "There is a concept in certain areas of theoretical thought that the choices we make at significant moments in our lives do not simply close off other possibilities. In some frameworks of understanding, those other possibilities continue. They unfold along a different path, with a different version of the same person living them out." Taeho looked at him carefully. "You are telling me that the other life was real. I am telling you that within the framework of what you experienced, it may have been that at some point in your past, a different choice created a different path, and the man on that path is still you. The same person, the same fundamental self, but shaped by different decisions, and therefore living a different life." Taeho sat with that for a moment. "Then why could I see him?" Aravind smiled. "Perhaps you were not seeing him. Then what was I seeing?" "Perhaps you were seeing yourself." The room was quiet for a while after that. Taeho said, "He had things I have never had. Yes, a wife, a daughter, a home that felt like a home. Yes, he was patient. He was present." Aravind looked at him steadily. "And do you believe those qualities belong only to him?" Taeho did not answer. Aravind leaned forward slightly. "You have spent your entire life controlling everything around you. Your environment, your reactions, your relationships, the distance between yourself and everyone else. Perhaps your consciousness has finally found a way to show you something that your controlled life never allowed you to see. Which is what? Another possibility of yourself." Taeho looked away toward the window. Aravind added, after a pause, "And perhaps you should stop fighting it." "Why?" "Because if your consciousness has gone to the trouble of showing you another life, you should at least have the manners to listen." Taeho looked back at him and remembered everything. The 48 hours and the visions and his lieutenant's carefully neutral face. He almost laughed. Aravind's expression remained perfectly composed. "Besides, you already know you like the family. I do not." "You smiled when you described the little girl." Taeho straightened in his chair. "I did not. Of course, Aravind said. My mistake. They resumed sessions after that. Taeho approached them differently now, with less resistance and more honesty. One afternoon, Aravind guided him into a deeper state than they had reached before, and Taeho's consciousness made the crossing again. This time, he found himself in a large auditorium, seated among rows of people, all facing a stage at the front of the room. The atmosphere was warm and slightly formal. It was a graduation ceremony. Taeho looked toward the stage. Nuri walked across it. She was older now, not 3 years old, but a young woman, composed and bright-eyed, carrying herself with confidence. She crossed the stage, accepted what she had come for, and the auditorium filled with people applauding for someone they love. Taeho watched her with tears running down his face. When she found him afterward in the crowd, she came straight to him and put her arms around him, and he held on to her. I am so proud of you, he said. Nuri pulled back just far enough to look at his face. I knew you would be, Papa. Cora reached them, and the three of them stood together in the warm noise of the auditorium, and Taeho felt the full weight of years he had not lived. Years of school mornings and scraped knees and arguments and reconciliations and a child growing up. He felt all of it at once, compressed into one moment, and it was almost more than he could hold. Then he opened his eyes. Aravind across from him, watching him calmly. Welcome back, Aravind said. Taeho looked at him. How long? 43 minutes. Taeho said nothing for a while. Then she graduated. Nuri? She was grown. She walked across a stage, and she looked at me like I had never once let her down. Aravind was quiet. Taeho looked at his own hands. I have never let anyone look at me like that. I have never given anyone the chance to. It was around this time that Taeho's mother came to visit. She was elderly and warm and completely unbothered by her son's reputation. She came with her caregiver, stayed for a few hours, and talked to Taeho, covering everything from what he was eating, to whether he was sleeping enough, to what she had heard about various people they both knew. He walked her to the entrance when she was ready to leave. Her caregiver waited near the door. She looked at him before she went. When are you finally going to give me grandchildren? She said. It was not the first time she had asked. It was possibly the 100th. Taeho looked at her and smiled. Actually, Mother, I already have a wife. She went completely still. What? And a 3-year-old daughter. Her eyes went wide. You are married? Taeho felt laughter building somewhere in his chest. His mother's expression moved rapidly through several stages. Surprise, disbelief, and then the full, magnificent arrival of wounded maternal feeling. My son got married without telling his own mother? Who is she? Where is she? Where is my granddaughter? How could you do this to me? Taeho was laughing now, genuinely and helplessly. He could not remember laughing this hard in a very long time. Mother, he managed. It was a joke. She stared at him. Then she raised her hand and struck his arm lightly, the way she had always done when he was a boy, and when he said something she did not appreciate. You think that was funny? A little, he admitted. She shook her head, but something around her mouth was softening. One day you will understand that mothers do not joke about grandchildren. He watched her leave. He stood in the doorway of his mansion for a moment, after her car had gone, still smiling, and then not smiling, and then simply standing there with the echo of her words settling somewhere inside him. One day you will understand. He was beginning to think he already did. Several weeks later, Taeho was in the back of his car, moving through the afternoon traffic of Seoul. He was not thinking about the visions, or the meditation, or any of it. He was simply watching the city move past the window. Then he saw her, a woman walking along the street, and he sat up. He said, "Stop the car." His driver pulled over immediately. His bodyguards looked at each other in the front seat. In all the years they had worked for Song Taeho, they had never once heard him ask to stop the car for a person on a street. For a meeting, yes. for a location, but not for a person, and certainly not like this, with that expression on his face. Tae-ho got out. He walked toward her. She was moving at an easy pace, unhurried. He came around in front of her and stopped. She stopped too, and looked at him politely, yet fully alert, as someone unexpectedly intercepted by a stranger. "Cora?" he said. She looked at him. "Yes?" He stood there. She was exactly as he remembered, and also entirely different, because she was real, here, in his world, in his city, with no knowledge of any sunlit bedroom or any beach house, or any 3-year-old girl with pancake ambitions. "Have we met before?" she asked. He could not tell her the truth. He understood that, so he offered her the simplest version of something adjacent to it. "You looked familiar," he said. "I get that sometimes," she said, and then she smiled. They stood there on a street, talking for longer than either of them planned to. She was direct and unhurried and said exactly what she meant, and she was not impressed by the quality of his suit, or the car idling behind him, or the 2 men standing near it, trying to look like they were not watching every second of this exchange. She talked to him like a person, and he found, to his own surprise, that he talked back the same way. They met again, and then again, after that. Walks through parts of the city at first, then coffee dates, and then dinners that lasted long, because neither of them was in a hurry to end the conversation. Cora gradually saw the man beneath the composure. She saw how carefully he listened, how he paid attention. She saw that he had spent so many years making himself self-sufficient that he had genuinely forgotten, or perhaps never known, what it felt like to let someone simply sit beside him without requiring anything from the situation. She was not awed by him. She was interested in him, which was entirely different, and considerably more difficult for him to manage. She challenged him when he was being controlled instead of honest. She laughed at him when he was being unnecessarily formal about things that did not require formality. She asked him questions that required real answers. One evening they were sitting across from each other after dinner, the restaurant mostly empty around them, and she looked at him and said, "You know what I think?" "I rarely know what you think," he said. "That is one of the more interesting things about you." She smiled. "I think you have been in charge of everything for so long that you have forgotten what it feels like to simply be in something. A conversation, a moment, a life." He looked at her. She said, "You are here right now, but part of you is always managing the room." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am working on that." "I know," she said. "That is why I am still here." He proposed to her on an evening that was not planned or prepared. There was no grand setting, no orchestrated moment. They were just walking, and he stopped, and she stopped beside him, and he looked at her and popped the question. He told her that he had convinced himself for years that love was a luxury he could not afford, that he had recently been shown, in a way he still could not fully explain and did not intend to try, that there was a version of himself who understood something he had always refused to learn, that a man could be strong and present at the same time. That love was not a subtraction from a person, but an addition to them. He told her he wanted to find out what that felt like, with her, in this life, in this city, starting now. Cora looked at him for a long time, then she said yes. The visions of the other life faded gradually after that. He finally understood that the other universe had not been showing him a life he had lost, or a life he deserved, or a life that was supposed to be his. It had been showing him a possibility that already lived inside him. If you could meet the version of yourself who made different choices, would you actually want to become that person? Because sometimes the life we dream about is not showing us what we lost. It may be showing us what we are capable of becoming. And whatever it is not in another universe. It is in you, and it is waiting, the way Tae-ho's better self waited, not in a different world, but in every choice that still lay ahead. Thank you so much for watching this story, all the way to the end. If this story gave you something to carry with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment telling us whether you've had an experience like this, and if you have not subscribed yet, please do it now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the stories we bring you every single day. We will see you in the next one.